السلام عليكم ورحمة الله.
الله أكبر الله أكبر الله أكبر الله أكبر أشهد أن لا إله إلا الله أشهد أن لا إله إلا الله أشهد أن محمدًا رسول الله أشهد أن محمدًا رسول الله حي على الصلاة حي على الصلاة حي على الفلاح حي على الفلاح الله أكبر الله أكبر لا إله إلا الله
بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. إن الحمد لله نحمده ونستعينه ونستغفره ونستهديه ونعوذ بالله من شرور أنفسنا ومن سيئات أعمالنا من يهده الله فلا مضل له ومن يضلل فلا هادي له وأشهد أن لا إله إلا الله وأشهد أن محمدًا عبده ورسوله. قال الله تعالى في القرآن المجيد: يا أيها الذين آمنوا اتقوا الله حق تقاته ولا تموتن إلا وأنتم مسلمون. وقال الله تعالى: يا أيها الناس اتقوا ربكم الذي خلقكم من نفس واحدة وخلق منها زوجها وبث منهما رجالا كثيرا ونساء واتقوا الله الذي تساءلون به والأرحام إن الله كان عليكم رقيبا. أما بعد، إن أصدق الحديث كتاب الله وخير الهدي هدي محمد صلى الله عليه وسلم. Maymuna radiallahu anha reported a hadith which is in the Sunan of Abi Dawud. She asks Rasulullah sallallahu alayhi wasallam, Ya Rasulullah, tell us about this sacred house in Jerusalem. Tell us about this sacred house in Jerusalem. Rasulullah sallallahu alayhi wasallam said, it is the place where resurrection will take place. And praying and he's referring to Al-Quds. Praying here equals 1,000 prayers. And she says, beautiful question. She says, what if we can't endure the travel to Jerusalem, Al-Quds? He said, then send them a gift by way of an oil that will burn the lanterns in Masjid al-Aqsa, in Jerusalem. You see, brothers and sisters, Masjid al-Aqsa was a very, very distinct situation and issue and matter and a place of aqidah for not just the Ummah of Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam. And it will always be a place of contention. unfortunately. Think about Masjid al-Aqsa as a place of the gauge of the Muslims' iman, the ummah of the ummah's level of iman. Why is this important? Rasulullah ﷺ was the only one in his lifetime from the Muslims that prayed in Masjid al-Aqsa when he went through Isra al-Miraj, and he led the prophets in prayer. Right? So many years later, in the year 637 approximately of the Hijri calendar, when the Muslims are in the brink of defeating the Romans, moving from Syria, and now Jerusalem was never in the hands of the Muslims now, but now Amr ibn al-As, Ubaidah ibn Jarrah, and Abu Ubaidah ibn Jarrah, and many other Sahaba, which I'm going to mention inshallah. Don't worry about the names. Worry about, or just be concerned with the issue that we're discussing inshallah. Amr ibn al-As is now laying siege, and many other Sahaba from 5 different directions in Jerusalem. They made it a fact that there's not going to be a single drop of blood during the siege in this overtaking of Jerusalem. So these letters are going back to Umar radiallahu anhu, who's in Medina, who's the Khalifa at that time. Remember, Umar radiallahu anhu's reign was 10 years, 10 and a half years. Abu Bakr's was 2 years. So during the reign of Abu Bakr, Umar radiallahu anhu, now, the contention and the point that the patriarch makes to Abu Ubaidah and Amr ibn al-As is that we'll give you the keys to Jerusalem, but we're not going to give it to you. And remember, this siege lasted for 4 months of surrounding Jerusalem, of the Sahaba. So when this happens, they said, okay, what are we supposed to do? They said, we want your Khalifa to come and receive the keys. And there were many reasons for this. Number one, to some resources in Islamic literature, of course, that Umar radiallahu anh, the description of Umar radiallahu anh was in the scriptures of the person who's going to have the keys. The second is, they knew the justice of Umar radiallahu anh. And Jerusalem was basically falling. It was almost over. And they were surrounded by Muslim armies. And the last is that when a patriarch or a king who's responsible for the holiest place in Christianity, and still is, wants to hand it to the person who's responsible for the Muslims. So, a group of Christians go to look for Umar radiallahu anh in Medina. And they're supposed to give him the instructions to go to Jerusalem to take the keys. When they head to Medina and reach Medina for that long travel, they go to what's supposed to be his house. In their definition, it wasn't a house. It was just a small, tiny structure. Khalifa of the believers. They go and look in the masjid of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam, and they're still looking for him. They finally find somebody that can lead him. They're expecting that there's going to be bodyguards, there's a palace, there's servants everywhere. Where do they find him? They find him sitting on a mat. They find him sitting on a mat with patches all over his clothing. Astonished. They give him the news. As you've heard, Jerusalem's under siege, and the patriarch, Sophronius, is only going to give the keys to you, but you physically have to go there and take them. Umar radiallahu anh consults his counsel, but in specific Uthman radiallahu anh and Ali radiallahu anhuma. Uthman radiallahu anh says to Umar radiallahu anh, if you leave Medina, it's vulnerable, it's open. I don't think it's a good idea. Ali radiallahu anh, who is actually, many people don't know this, but Ali radiallahu anh was the main counsel of Umar radiallahu anh. Ali radiallahu anh says, go. I think you should go. And he reminds him of the hadith of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam. In another narration, if you get a chance to pray 2 rak'at in Masjid al-Aqsa, do so. And if you can't, then send them oil to burn the lanterns. To keep the lights open, basically. Now Umar radiallahu anh has to think, is this prophecy going to be fulfilled through me? Because nobody after Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam has actually prayed in Masjid al-Aqsa. Ali radiallahu anh says, go. Umar radiallahu anh leaves Ali radiallahu anh responsible as a substitute for him as the Khalifa. Ali radiallahu anh always has this beautiful situation in the seerah where the people are coming to assassinate Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, and Ali is in his place in bed, and Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam leaves to go to Medina. Umar radiallahu anh is going to fulfill a prophecy, and who's his substitute now? Ali radiallahu anh. Allah places people in honor however He wills, subhanahu wa ta'ala. So now Umar radiallahu anh is planning his travel. Who does he take with him? And I know we've all heard the stories when we were children, but we have to add a little something else to this, inshallah, to give it some depth and to really understand what happened. Umar radiallahu anh only takes one person with him, his servant, and one camel. You'll find different narrations, inshallah. I'm just going through the narration of Imam al-Waqidi and many other scholars. But there's many narrations of what animal, and that's important but not that important for right now. He doesn't take a helmet with him. No armor on his head. It was something very unsettling for somebody at that time, in that part of the world, to travel without weapons and without an army, or at least guards, and with armor or some type of, no armor on his head, not even a turban, just in the sun. And when he's leaving Medina, he says something really beautiful, brothers and sisters. Please, let's reflect on this. He says, Ya Allah, protect my clothing from seeing the wealth of the Muslims. The reason why he had 17 patches in his clothes, the reason why for many part of his life that's the only clothing he had, another part of his life, because he was very tall, he used to ask his son, Abdullah ibn Umar, let me get a piece of your clothing or one of your clothing so I could sew it to the bottom of mine so I have a full garment to cover myself. The most powerful man in the world now, and we're going to see how powerful he was, and this is how he dresses. Radiallahu anhu. Why? Look at the responsibility. He says, Ya Allah, protect my clothing from the money of the Muslims. He doesn't want to have anything to do with being unjust, especially with people's wealth. So him and his servant are traveling. Now along this travel, going to this monumental, world-changing, forever situation of getting the keys, he's also stopping by in different towns along the way, naturally, to get rest. And he takes time to talk to people while he's there. He has on his mind Masjid al-Aqsa in Jerusalem, and he still is making time for people as he's going through these towns, making his way. Right? Goes to them and talks to them. One of the towns he goes to, he comes across a situation where there's an old man who basically is a shepherd, but he's not able to, so he has a younger man, take care of his flock. But how he's compensating this man is rather interesting. He's compensating this man, this young man, so that in a way that he's having relations with his own wife. The man who's responsible, who's the shepherd. He tells the boy, you be responsible for my flock and I'll compensate you through having relations with my wife. Umar radiallahu anh finds out about this. He says, bring me that man. He says, do you know that this is haram? He says, no. He said, well, now you know it's haram. You're never going to do that again. If I find out again that you're doing this, your neck is mine. Umar radiallahu anh keeps moving up, goes to the next town. He comes to a town where he finds a man that's married to 2 sisters. And then he relates to him the verse in the Quran that you're not allowed to marry 2 sisters As Allah mentions in the Quran, He states the verse and He asks him to divorce one of the two women. And he says, Ya Rasulullah, Ya Umar, I love both of them. He says, that's too bad. You can't be married to two sisters. And he keeps moving on and on until he gets to a place called Jabiya, which is basically in Syria, outskirts of Damascus. And when he gets there, he gets a reception of the Sahaba. Some of them he hasn't seen in a while. And from amongst the Sahaba is Abu Ubaidah ibn Jarrah, a governor, a general, a commander, one of the most prominent Sahaba from the life of Rasulullah. And they see the state of Umar radiallahu an, and they say, Amirul Mu'mineen, you're now leaving this journey and going to Jerusalem. Maybe you should wear something a little more presentable. Mind you, this journey that he was on with his servant, they were taking turns, right? We all heard this story. They were taking turns, right? One of the times where it was Umar radiallahu anhu to hold the reins of his servant who's riding the camel in the heat, he comes across kind of like a muddy, marshy area, and he falls, and he gets mud on his clothing. And he gets right back up, takes his shoes off, holds his shoes in one hand, because it's very difficult to walk in shoes when it's very muddy, and holds the reins in the other hand and continues. He has those clothes when he gets to see the Sahaba. So the Sahaba tell him, it would be better if you change your clothes. And he said, what? This statement, he says multiple times in his life. نَحْنُ قَوْمٌ أَعَزَّنَا اللَّهُ بِالْإِسْلَامِ. We are a nation that Allah gave us honor through Islam. And if we seek honor through any other means, Allah will humiliate us. His clothes don't matter. The clothes aren't important to him. So, he had a habit of visiting his governors. So one of the governors was Abu Ubaidah. He says, Abu Ubaidah, take me to your house. He says, you're not going to like coming to my house. He says, take me to your house. He said, Amir al-Mu'mineen, I guarantee you're going to cry if you come to my house. He says, take me to your house. He takes him to his house. He enters his home, and the Khalifa sees absolutely nothing, no furniture. Nothing's there. And he says, what do you have to eat and drink? Brings him a little bit of water and basically crumbs and broken parts of bread. And Umar radiallahu anh starts to weep. And he says, Ya Abu Ubaidah, every single one of us is attached to the dunya except for you. The dunya has conquered all of us except for you, Abu Ubaidah. And he says to the Amir al-Mu'mineen, Umar radiallahu anh, he said, this is enough for me to get to the other side. Now, brothers and sisters, I'm telling you, there's so many layers to this journey. And every time you delve into the story, there's more and more layers that you're peeling. I am giving you, again, a super abridged version of this journey. I'm doing it, to be honest with you, no justice. But it's a message that has to be relayed. So now, Umar radiallahu anh is being expected in Jerusalem. And that's another trek. He's heading in with his servant, again, trekking all the way to Jerusalem from Jabiya. When he approaches, he sees there's an exception. There's a rows of people and droves of people set up. And one of the narrations says that there was a carpet that was set up for him because that's what they used to do for royalty. And when Umar radiallahu anh saw some of the Sahaba in very nice, elaborate clothing, right? One of the narrations is, as far as Khalid bin Walid and another Sahabi, is that he looked at them, he got off his mount, and he threw a rock at them. And he said, it's only been a little bit of time and you're dressing like this already? Meaning they were wearing nice clothing. Right? But to Umar radiallahu anhu's standards, it was very different. And he actually took off the garment. He said, look, I have my armor, I have my sword underneath. It's not what you think. It's just to be a little presentable. Yeah, Amir al-Mu'mineen. So Amir al-Mu'mineen he was always in the zone since his Islam, and he was always in the zone. Nobody was able to compete with him except for Abu Bakr radiallahu anhu, who passed away before him. But as long as Umar radiallahu anhu was alive, there was no comparison. And now he's entering into Jerusalem, and the people see and awaiting this great Umar, who's now covering the entire landscape with Islam and conquering the Romans, conquered the Persians, conquered all these superpowers. And as he comes close, they see him walking, holding the reins of somebody else standing on one camel. Nobody behind them, nobody in front of them, no armor. Umar radiallahu anh approaches, and now people start seeing that, okay, the people who are approaching him, he's the one that's standing. Who is this person? How come he's dressed like this? You see, when you're in a position of power, the way he was, and you're humble and you're modest, that modesty gives you more power than anybody else, no matter how well they dress or how many people they have around them. That doesn't matter. Human beings, we have a very, very awesome sixth sense of noticing things. And one of those is when somebody's very powerful and they don't show any signs of it, that person is actually powerful. As Rasulullah he said, the true rich person is the one who has richness of the heart. Because if a person is actually rich in their heart, even if they don't have any money, they don't care. They just want to get by. And if a person has a lot of money and they don't have a rich heart, it's never going to be enough. And the more they have can cause even more depression. Right? I'm not talking about all instances. Some instances. But the general rule of Rasulullah is the greatest richness is the richness of the heart. And here we have Umar radiallahu anh entering Jerusalem, and people astonished the way he is. And now comes time for him to meet the patriarch. The patriarch sees him, and when he glances and he looks at him, he says, if it's people that are in power like you, your people will never not be in power, basically. You'll always be a strong people. He saw, without even having a long conversation with him, if this is the man that's responsible for all of these conquerings, he has to be a just person. Just look at his garments. So then he's giving a tour to Umar radiallahu anh of Jerusalem. Very cordial, very friendly. You see, they were used to, the inhabitants, the Christians of Jerusalem, were hearing stories and remembered what the Persians had did to them and completely annihilated them. This siege had no blood, and Umar radiallahu anh physically came in the way that he was, and he's spending time with the patriarch. And now the patriarch is handing him the keys of Jerusalem, and they make special conditions called the Shurut Umariyah, the Shurut of Umar radiallahu anh, the conditions of Umar radiallahu anh for the people who are staying there. From amongst the conditions are that when Muslims now take rule, all the Christians, their churches, and any other places of worship, their crosses will be safe. Anybody who wants to leave with the Byzantines, meaning the Romans, they're going to have safe travel and nothing's going to happen to them. And they will pay taxes, the inhabitants will pay taxes the same way Muslims pay zakat. They will be paying taxes. By the way, the taxes, the jizya that we pay in Islam, people very little understand how this works. Umar radiallahu anh, in many places, when he was the Khalifa, the jizya, the taxes of the non-Muslim inhabitants, that if they pay, they have all the rights of the Muslims and protected just like the Muslims, was actually less than zakat that the Muslims paid. It was less than zakat. Right? So, when Sophronius now is hearing the rumbles of it's time for Salah. It's time for Salatul Dhuhr. Umar radiallahu anh goes to the Sahaba, and there's this reunion happening of Sahaba. Brothers and sisters, remember in this time, many of the Sahaba went out and became governors, and some of them haven't met each other in a long time. And who do they see standing there? They say, Bilal radiallahu anhu. Bilal and Umar, when they actually first met in this moment, when he came to Jerusalem, they actually embraced for a very long time because they haven't seen each other in a very long time. And remember this situation now in 637, 638 of Hijrah, of the Hijri calendar. Some of the Sahaba, when Muhammad ﷺ had revelation to when they fought Badr, and they were all young men. A lot of them had white beards. Now Umar radiallahu anhu was 60 years old. And some of them haven't seen each other in a long time. So they're having this reunion at the same time, which is a whole, maybe 10 different khutbahs of their interaction with each other when they're meeting each other and how they invited each other. That's a whole different topic, a beautiful topic, right? Umar radiallahu anh says to Bilal radiallahu anh, he says, Ya Bilal, give the azan for Dhuhr. Bilal says, I haven't given the adhan since Muhammad ﷺ passed away. He says, I couldn't bring myself to be the mu'adhin. So I never gave adhan after that. Umar radiallahu anh begs him. He says, Bilal, give adhan. He says, I can't. Bilal radiallahu anh got busy after Muhammad ﷺ passed away. He left Medina and he didn't want to come back. And he got busy with jihad and busy with expeditions and didn't want to come to Medina. Umar radiallahu anh, he never wanted to leave Medina. So he stayed in Medina. He only left Medina twice. So he says, Bilal says, I can't do it. Umar radiallahu anh says, wouldn't Rasulullah be happy if he was alive and he saw you do it here? This is a day of rejoicing. We've never seen this day before. So he says, okay, I'll do it. Umar radiallahu anh goes back with the patriarch, not too far of a distance. Bilal calls the adhan, and all of the Sahaba start crying. Every single one of them. Because they haven't heard that adhan since the life of Rasulullah. When Bilal radiallahu anh is giving the adhan, Umar radiallahu anh falls to his knees in crying. And the Sahaba said this was the same cry he had when Muhammad ﷺ passed away. It's the same exact thing. There's no difference. Look how Allah brings all of these things together for the sake of Muslims conquering Quds. Everything that they had when they were young, when they were with Rasulullah, they're now at an older age, and now there's another conquering happening for them. The first conquering was their Islam and Medina and all of that beautiful stuff, and now Allah's giving them more. Giving us more. The patriarch, he asks him, he says, why don't you pray in the church here? Umar radiallahu anh, he says, I can't pray here. I appreciate the gesture. He didn't get into the halal, into the haram, none of that. Look at the humanness of this. He says that if I pray here, the people, the Muslims that will come after me will make this a masjid, meaning they're going to start praying here and they're going to think they're going to have to. So Umar radiallahu anh prayed away, 100 to a few hundred feet away, which now, and he was right, that place is known as Masjid Umar. It's a masjid that was established there called Masjid Umar. Even in handing over the keys of Jerusalem to Umar, he took their fear away completely and made them realize how much of a benefit Islam is for them and how much they needed Islam. And then when he has to hand over the keys of the church now, because it's going to be under Muslim rule, the priest has to now, the most holiest place of Christendom, even till this day, these keys have to be handed to Umar radiallahu anh now. Umar radiallahu anh takes the keys and leaves a specific family responsible. They're called Al Nusayba, of Nusayba bint Ka'ab. Her son, Abdullah, was there during the conquering of Jerusalem, and the keys were given to him to open the church at their appointed times or in the mornings. That same family up until today, opens the holiest site of Christendom in Palestine. That same family, every morning in Palestine, opens the church doors, the holiest site of Christendom, because of the pact of Umar radiallahu anh that he made. We think that some of our actions are just very, very, they're just going to last while we're alive. If it is seeded with the sincerity of Allah, it's going to last until Yawm al-Qiyamah. When we talk about the justice of Umar radiallahu anh, last part of the story, even though there's so much, he asks Ka'b al-Ahbar, who was a priest who became Muslim, who knew the area well of Jerusalem, and he says to him, where did Rasulullah lead the prayer of the other prophets during Isra wal Mi'raj? Where did he lead them? Ka'b al-Ahbar originally indicates him to a place, and then Umar radiallahu anh did some more digging, which he literally had to do, and he found the place. Do you know how the Muslims found that place? Umar radiallahu anh and the Sahaba, imagine what happened to their hearts. It was actually a dumpster. They used to use it for a dumpster. And get rid of all of the filth and everything. I'm not going to get into details of what actual filth there was, but they actually reserved it for a certain type of filth that they used to dispose of. What does Umar radiallahu anh do? Rolls up his sleeves and starts cleaning that filth with his own hands. The Sahaba join him, taking off their garments, cleaning up this place, and now Umar radiallahu anh is ready to pray where Rasulullah prayed and led the prophets. When Rasulullah turned around in Isra wal Mi'raj, who was behind him? Ibrahim alayhi salam, Dawood alayhi salam, all the prophets, Sulaiman alayhi salam, the one who actually built Masjid al-Aqsa. When Umar radiallahu anh turns around him, Abu Ubaidah. The second greatest gathering ever in Masjid al-Aqsa was this gathering of Umar radiallahu anh with all of the Sahaba. Continuing this legacy, this return of what happened in Isra wal Mi'raj to Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam is now happening here. 637, 638 of the Hijri calendar. In the first raka'ah, Umar radiallahu anh reads Surah Al-Sad. In the second raka'ah, he reads Surah Al-Isra. In the first raka'ah, he reads Surah Al-Sad. Why? Because Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is telling us in Surah Al-Sad, in Surah Al-Sad, that for Dawood alayhi salam, that Allah is going to make him the Khalifa of this earth and tell him to rule with justice. So that is what Umar, that's why he chose Surah Sad. In the second rak'ah, Subhanalladhi asra bi'abdihi laylan min al-masjid al-haram. How pure is that one? How glorified is that one? Allah, who caused this night journey for Rasulullah from Masjid al-Haram ila Masjid al-Aqsa. He's done with his prayer, and he turns around and he's weeping. Radiyallahu anh. They asked him, we're here, this is a joyous moment. Are your tears of joy? Umar radiallahu anh, he said, I fear for you, I'm telling you the hadith, and I fear for you what Rasulullah feared for you. Rasulullah, he said, I don't fear for you a shirk. He's talking about the believers. I don't fear for you shirk. I fear for you the day when people are competing for the dunya and Allah humiliates them. In a very, very similar situation, when Umar radiallahu anh is leaving now Masjid al-Aqsa and it's in the hands of the Muslims, he turns around and he tells the Muslims something very beautiful. He says to the Muslims, and this is his final word with the people of Jerusalem before he leaves. He says that always be in shukr of Allah and never be ungrateful. Because when you're ungrateful, you start to sin more. And when you sin more and you don't do tawbah, then Allah humiliates you. And when Allah humiliates you, He'll humiliate you by people over your shoulders that are not like you, meaning they're not going to be believers. And you're competing for this world is what's going to destroy you. And then He leaves. Remember what the patriarch said to him. He said, if you have a leader like this, that the Muslims will never ever be defeated. Brothers and sisters, we go through the life of Umar radiallahu anh to let you know, number one, on an academic level, you can read leadership books. Those are beautiful. You can read, management, educational leadership and management, and all those things are beautiful, right? But the leadership skills that we have people promoting right now are those that are devoted to a secularist, capitalist way of conducting yourself as a leader in this situation. But if you want true leadership of this world, of Umar radiallahu anh, who's sitting in ripped clothing with 17 patches, and all of the nations are being conquered, and gold and silver are being thrown at his feet, and he has no love for it, that's true leadership. Because if you run after the dunya, you're never going to catch it. But if you run after Allah, the dunya is going to be running after you even though you don't want it. And we ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to instill this level of leadership in ourselves first, in our homes. Ya Allah, give us the example of Umar and let us be the Umars of our homes, of our communities. And Ya Allah, let us see that day that we have, and that what we've been yearning for, Ya Allah, and that we've been thirsty for, and that we've been suffering because of. Give us a true leader for the Muslim Ummah, like Umar radiallahu anhu, Ya Allah. Because there's no other way without you, Ya Allah. And we know that you only love justice, and you're with those who have justice. Ya Allah, there's no justice around us. So let someone from amongst us emerge that's a person of justice to unite all the scattered lives and countries and dignities and honors that we've seen in these many years. Ya Allah, bring us together. Wa akhir da'wana alhamdulillahi rabbil alameen. الحمد لله رب العالمين والصلاة والسلام على رسوله الكريم وعلى آله وصحبه أجمعين. قال الله تعالى في القرآن المجيد: إن الله وملائكته يصلون على النبي يا أيها الذين آمنوا صلوا عليه وسلموا تسليما. اللهم صل على محمد وعلى آل محمد كما صليت على إبراهيم وعلى آل إبراهيم إنك حميد مجيد. اللهم بارك على محمد وعلى آل محمد كما باركت على إبراهيم وعلى آل إبراهيم إنك حميد مجيد. عباد الله رحمكم الله، إن الله يأمركم بالعدل والإحسان وإيتاء ذي القربى وينهى عن الفحشاء والمنكر والبغي يعظكم لعلكم تذكرون. أقيموا الصلاة.
الله أكبر الله أكبر، أشهد أن لا إله إلا الله، أشهد أن محمد رسول الله. حي على الصلاة، حي على الفلاح، قد قامت الصلاة، قد قامت الصلاة. الله أكبر الله أكبر، لا إله إلا الله.
الله أكبر. الحمد لله رب العالمين الرحمن الرحيم مالك يوم الدين إياك إياك نعبد وإياك نستعين اهدنا الصراط المستقيم صراط الذين أنعمت عليهم غير المغضوب عليهم ولا الضالين. ألم تر كيف فعل ربك بأصحاب الفيل ألم يجعل كيدهم في تضليل وأرسل عليهم طيرا أبابيل ترميهم بحجارة من سجيل فجعلهم كعصف مأكول. الله أكبر. سمع الله لمن حمده. الله أكبر. الله أكبر. الله أكبر. الله أكبر. الحمد لله رب العالمين الرحمن الرحيم مالك يوم الدين إياك نعبد وإياك نستعين اهدنا الصراط المستقيم صراط الذين أنعمت عليهم غير المغضوب عليهم ولا الضالين. لإيلاف قريش إيلافهم رحلة الشتاء والصيف فليعبدوا رب هذا البيت الذي أطعمهم من جوع وآمنهم من خوف. الله أكبر. سمع الله لمن حمده. الله أكبر. الله أكبر. الله أكبر. الله أكبر. السلام عليكم ورحمة الله. السلام عليكم ورحمة الله.
Assalamu alaikum. Please stay seated. Our Imam will make a quick dua for a brother who will be having heart surgery.
So, brothers and sisters, before we make our dua, inshallah, and your own individual duas, please, afterwards. Farhan Khan, who is having heart surgery right now. So we're making dua for him and his recovery, Ya Allah. ربنا آتنا في الدنيا حسنة وفي الآخرة حسنة وقنا عذاب النار. اللهم صل على محمد وعلى آل محمد كما صليت